Hello everybody, and welcome to the central Bloomsday celebration in Croatia. We are in a town called Pula, which is a place where Joyce himself lived in 1904 and 1905 for a couple of months. My name is Vito Paoletic, and together with my mates we are going to read from Wandering Rocks and Nausicaa. The youngster will be all right, Martin Cunningham said, as they passed out of the castle yard gate. The policeman touched his forehead. God bless you, Martin Cunningham said, cheerily. He signed to the waiting Jarvey, who chucked at the reins and set on towards Lord Edward Street. Bronzed by cold, Miss Kennedy's head by Miss Dorsey's head appeared above the cross-blind of the Ormond Hotel. Yes, Martin Cunningham said, fingering his beard. I wrote to Father Conmee and laid the whole case before him. You could try it, our friend, Mr. Power suggested backward. Boyd? Martin Cunningham said shortly. Touch me not. John Wise Nolan, lagging behind, reading the list, came after them quickly down Castle Hill. On the steps of the City Hall, Councillor Nanetti, descending, hailed Alderman Cowley and Councillor Abraham Lyon, ascending. The castle car wheeled empty into Upper Exchange Street. Look here, Martin, John Wise Nolan said, overtaking them at the mail office. I see Bloom put his name down for 5 shillings. Quite right, Martin Cunningham said, taking the list. And put down the 5 shillings too. Without a second word either, Mr. Power said. Strange but true, Martin Cunningham added. John Wise Nolan opened wide eyes. I'll say there is much kindness in the Jew, he quoted elegantly. He went down Parliament Street. There's Jimmy Henry, Mr. Power said, just heading for Cavanagh's. Righto, Martin Cunningham said. Here he goes. Outside La Maison Claire, Blazes Borland waylaid Jack Mooney's brother-in-law, humpy, tight, making for the liberties. John Wise Nolan fell back with Mr. Power, while Martin Cunningham took the elbow of a dapper little man in a shower of ale suit who walked uncertainly with hasty steps by Mikey Anderson's watches. The assistant town clerk's cons are giving him some trouble, John Wise Nolan told Peter Power. They followed round the corner towards James Cavanagh's wine rooms. The empty castle car fronted them at rest in Essex Gate. Martin Cunningham, speaking always, showed often the list at which Jimmy Henry did not glance. And Long Jog Fanning is here too, John Wise Nolan said, as large as life. The tall form of Long John Fanning filled the doorway where he stood. Good day, Mr. Sub-Sheriff, Martin Cunningham said, as all halted and greeted. Long John Fanning made no way for them. He removed his large Henry Clay decisively, and his large fierce eyes scowled intelligently over all their faces. Are the conscript father pursuing their peaceful deliberations? He said, with rich acrid utterance to the assistant town clerk. Hell open to Christians they were having, Jimmy Henry said pettishly, about their damned Irish language. Where was the marshal, he wanted to know, to keep order in the council chamber? And old Barlow the mace-bearer laid up with asthma, no mace on the table, nothing in order, no quorum even in Hutchinson, the Lord Mayor, in Llandudno and Little Sock and Shellocks doing locum tenens for him. Damned Irish language, language of our forefathers. Long John Fanning blew a plume of smoke from his lips. Martin Cunningham spoke by turns, twirling the peak of his beard to the assistant town clerk and the sub-sheriff, while John Wise Nolan held his peace. What Dignam was that? Long John Fanning asked. Jimmy Henry made a grimace and lifted his left foot. Oh, my corns, he said plaintively. Come up there for goodness sake till I sit down somewhere. Oh, mind. Testily, he made room for himself beside Long John Fanning's flank and passed in and up the stairs. Come on up, Martin Cunningham said to the sub-sheriff. I don't think you knew him, or perhaps you did, though. With John Wise Nolan, Mr. Power followed them in. Decent little soul he was, Mr. Power said to the stalwart back of Long John Fanning, ascending towards Long John Fanning in the mirror. Rather low-sized, Dignam of Menton's office that was, Martin Cunningham said. Long John Fanning could not remember him. Clatter of horse hoofs sounded from the air. What's that? Martin Cunningham said. All turned where they stood. John Wise Nolan came down again. From the cool shadow of the doorway, he saw the horses pass Parliament Street. harness and glossy pastons in sunlight shimmering. Gaily they went past before his cool, unfriendly eyes, not quickly. In saddles of the leathers, leaping leathers, rode outriders. "What was it?" Martin Cunningham asked, as they went on up the staircase. "The Lord Lieutenant General and General Governor of Ireland," John Wise Nolan answered from the stair foot.
As they trod across the thick carpet, Buck Mulligan whispered behind his Panama to Haines, "Parnell's brother, there in the corner." They chose a small table near the window opposite a long-faced man whose beard and gaze hung intently down on a chessboard. "Is that he?" Haines asked, twisting round in his seat. "Yes," Mulligan said. "That's John Howard, his brother, our city marshal." John Howard Parnell translated the white bishop quietly, and his grey claw went up again to his forehead whereat it rested. An instant after, under its screen, his eyes looked quickly ghost-bright at his foe and fell once more upon a working corner. "I'll take a melange," Haines said to the waitress. "2 melanges," Buck Mulligan said. "And bring us some scones and butter and some cakes as well." When she had gone, he said, laughing, "We call it DBC because they have damn bad cakes. Oh, but you missed Daedalus and Hamlet." Haines opened his new-bought book. "I'm sorry," he said. "Shakespeare's the happy hunting ground of all minds that have lost their balance." The one-legged sailor growled at the area of 14 Nelson Street. "England expects." Buck Mulligan's primrose waistcoat shook gaily to his laughter. "You should see him," he said, "when his body loses its balance. Wandering Angus, I call him." "I'm sure he has an idée fixe," Haines said, pinching his chin thoughtfully with thumb and forefinger. "Now I'm speculating what it would be likely to be. Such persons always have." Buck Mulligan bent across the table gravely. "They drove his wits astray," he said, "by visions of hell. He will never capture the Attic note, the note of Swinburne of all poets, the white death and the ruddy birth. That is his tragedy. He can never be a poet. The joy of creation."
"Eternal punishment," Haines said, nodding curtly. "I see. Tackled him this morning on belief. There was something on his mind. I saw. It's rather interesting because Professor Pokorny of Vienna makes an interesting point out of that." Buck Mulligan's watchful eyes saw the waitress come. He helped her to unload her tray. "He can find no trace of hell in ancient Irish myth," Haines said, amid the cheerful cups. "The moral idea seems lacking, the sense of destiny, of retribution. Rather strange he should just have that fixed idea. Does he write anything for your movement?" He sank 2 lumps of sugar deftly longwise through the whipped cream. Buck Mulligan slid a steaming scone in 2 and plastered butter over its smoking pith. He bit off a piece hungrily. 10 years, he said, chewing and laughing. "He's going to write something in 10 years. "Seems a long way off," Haines said, thoughtfully lifting his spoon. "Still, I shouldn't wonder if he had after all." He tasted a spoonful from the creamy cone of his cup. "This is real Irish cream, I take it," he said with forbearance. "I don't want to be imposed on." Elijah skiffed, light crumpled throwaway, sailed eastward by flanks of ships and trawlers amid an archipelago of corks beyond New Wapping Street, past Benson's Ferry, and by the three-masted schooner Reservan from Bridgewater with bricks.
Almidano Artifoni walked past Hall Street, past Sewell's yard. Behind him, Cashel Boyle O'Connor, Fitzmaurice Tisdall Farrell, with stick umbrella Dusko dangling, shunned the lamp before Mr. Lawsmith's house, and crossing, walked along Marion Square. Distantly behind him, a blind stripling tapped its way by the wall of College Park. Cashel Boyle O'Connor, Fitzmaurice Tisdall Farrell, walked as far as Mr. Louis Werner's cheerful windows, then turned and strode back along Marion Square, his stick umbrella dust coat dangling. At the corner of Wilds he halted, frowned at Elijah's name announced on the Metropolitan Hall, frowned at the distant pleasance of Duke's Lawn. His eyeglass flashed frowning in the sun. With rat's teeth bared, he muttered, "Cactus volui." He strode on for Clare Street, grinding his fierce word. As he strode past Mr. Bloom's dental windows, the sway of his dust coat brushed rudely from its angle a slender tapping cane and swept onwards, having buffeted a tuleless body. The blind stripling turned his sickly face after the striding form. "God's curse on you," he said sourly, "whoever you are. You're blinder nor I am, you bitch's bastard.
Opposite rugged O'Donoghue's, Master Patrick Aloysius Dignam, pawing the pound and a half of mangans, late Fahrenbachs, pork steaks he had been sent for, went along warm Wicklow Street dawdling. It was too blooming dull sitting in the parlor with Mrs. Stower and Mrs. Quigley and Mrs. McDowell and the blind down, and they all at their sniffles and sipping sups of the superior tawny sherry Uncle Barney brought from Tunny's. And they eating crumbs of the cottage fruit cake, joined the whole blooming time and sighing. After Wicklow Lane, the window of Madame Doyle, court-dress milliner, stopped him. He stood looking in at the two puckers stripped to their pelts and putting up their props. From the side mirrors, two mourning masters Dignam gaped silently. Myler Kao, Dublin's pet lamb, will meet Sergeant Major Bennett, the Portobello bruiser, for a purse of 50 sovereigns. Gob, that'd be a good pucking match to see. Myler Kao, that's the chap sparring out to him with the green sash. 2 bar entrance, soldiers half price. I could easy do a bunk on Ma. Master Dignam on his left turned as he turned. That's me in mourning. When is it? May the 22nd. Sure, the blooming thing is all over. He turned to the right, and on his right, Master Dignam turned, his cap awry, his collar sticking up. Buttoning it down, his chin lifted, he saw the image of Marie Kendall, charming soubrette, beside the two puckers. One of them moths that do be in the packets of fags sour smokes, that his old fellow welted hell out of him, for one time he found out. Master Dignam got his collar down and dawdled on. The best pucker going for strength was Fitzsimmons. One puck in the wind from that fellow would knock you into the middle of next week, man. But the best pucker for science was Jem Corbett before Fitzsimmons knocked the stuffings out of him, dodging it all. In Grafton Street, Master Dignam saw a red flower in a tough's mouth and a swell pair of kicks on him, and he listening to what the drunk was telling him and grinning all the time. No send him out tram. Master Dignam walked along Nassau Street, shifted the pork steaks to his other hand. His collar sprang up again, and he tugged it down. The blooming stud was too small for the buttonhole of the shirt, blooming end to it. He met schoolboys with satchels. I'm not going tomorrow either. Stay away till Monday. He met other schoolboys. Do they notice I'm in mourning? Uncle Barney said he'd get it into the paper tonight. Then they'll all see it in the paper and read my name printed and Pa's name. His face got all gray instead of being red like it was, and there was a fly walking over it up to his eye. The scrunch that was when they were screwing the screws into the coffin, and the bumps when they were bringing it downstairs. Pa was inside and Ma crying in the parlor, and Uncle Barney telling the men how to get it round the bend. A big coffin it was, and high and heavy looking. How was that? The last night Pa was boozed, and he was standing on the landing there bawling out for his boots to go out to Tunny's for to booze more, and he looked buddy and short in his shirt. Never see him again. Death, that is. Pa is dead. My father is dead. He told me to be a good son to Ma. I couldn't hear the other things he said, but I saw his tongue and his teeth trying to say it better. Poor Pa. That was Mr. Dignam, my father. I hope he's in purgatory now, because he went to confession to Father Conroy on Saturday night.
William Humble, Earl of Dudley, and Lady Dudley, accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel Heseltine, drove out after luncheon from the Viceregal Lodge. In the following carriage were the Honorable Mrs. Paget, Miss de Courcy, and the Honorable Gerald Ward, A.D.C., in attendance. The cavalcade passed out by the lower gate of Phoenix Park, saluted by obsequious policemen, and proceeded past Kingsbridge along the northern quays. The Viceroy was most cordially greeted on his way through the metropolis. At Bloody Bridge, Mr. Thomas Kernan beyond the river greeted him vainly from afar. Between Queen's and Whitworth bridges, Lord Dudley's viceregal carriages passed and were unsaluted by Mr. Dudley White, B.L.M.A., who stood on Arran Quay outside Mrs. M.E. White's, the pawnbroker's, at the corner of Arran Street West, stroking his nose with his forefinger, undecided whether he should arrive at Phibbsborough more quickly by a triple change of tram, or by hailing a car, or on foot, through Smithfield, Constitution Hill, and Broadstone Terminus. In the porch of Four Courts, Richie Golding, with the cost bags of Golding, Collis, and Ward, saw him with surprise. Past Richmond Bridge at the doorstep of the office of Reuben J. Dodd, solicitor, agent for the Patriotic Insurance Company, an elderly female about to enter changed her plan and, retracing her steps by King's windows, smiled credulously on the representative of His Majesty. From its sluice in Wood Quay wall under Tom Devon's office, Puddle River hung out in fealty, a tongue of liquid sewage. Above the cross-blind of the Ormond Hotel, gold by bronze, Miss Kennedy's head by Miss Douce's head watched and admired. On Ormond Quay, Mr. Simon Dedalus, steering his way from the greenhouse for the sub-sheriff's office, stood still in mid-street and brought his hat low. His Excellency graciously returned Mr. Dedalus's greeting. From Cahill's corner, the Reverend Hugh C. Love, M.A., made obeisance unperceived, mindful of Lord's deputies whose hands, benignant, had held of yore rich advowsons. On Grattan Bridge, Lanahan and McCoy, taking leave of each other, watched the carriages go by. Passing by Roger Green's office and Dollard's big red printing house, Gertie McDowell, carrying the Catesby's cork lino letters for her father who was laid up, knew by the style it was the Lord and Lady Lieutenant, but she couldn't see what Her Excellency had on because the tram and Spring's big yellow furniture van had to stop in front of her on account of its being the Lord Lieutenant. Beyond Lundy Foots, from the shaded door of Kavanagh's wine rooms, John Wise Nolan smiled with unseen coldness toward the Lord Lieutenant General and the General Governor of Ireland. The Right Honourable William Humble, Earl of Dudley, G.C.V.O., passed Mickey Anderson's all-times ticking watches and Henry and James wax smart-suited, fresh-cheeked models, the gentleman Henry Dernier Cri James. Over against Dame Gate, Tom Rochford and Nosy Flynn watched the approach of the cavalcade. Tom Rochford, seeing the eyes of Lady Dudley fixed on him, took his thumbs quickly out of the pockets of his claret waistcoat and doffed his cap to her. A charming soubrette, great Marie Kendall, with dauby cheeks, lifted skirt, smiled daubily from her poster upon William Humble, Earl of Dudley, and upon Lieutenant Colonel H.G. Hasseltine, and also upon the Honorable Gerald Ward, A.D.C. From the window of the D.B.C., Buck Mulligan gaily and Haines gravely gazed down on the vice-regal equipage over the shoulders of eager guests, whose massive forms darkened the chessboard whereon John Howard Parnell looked intently. In Found Street, Dilly Dedalus, straining her sight upward from Chardonnel's first French primer, saw sunshades spanned and wheel spokes spinning in the glare. John Henry Menton, filling the doorway of commercial buildings, stared from wine-big oyster eyes, holding a fat gold hunter watch, not looked at in his fat left hand, not feeling it. Where the foreleg of King Billy's horse pawed the air, Miss Breen plucked her hastening husband back from under the hoofs of the outriders. She shouted in his ear the tidings. Understanding, he shifted his tomes to his left breast and saluted the second carriage. The Honorable Gerald Ward, A.D.C., agreeably surprised, made haste to reply. At Ponsonby's corner, a jaded white flagon H halted, and four-hatted white flagons halted behind him, ELYS, while outriders pranced past and carriages. Opposite Pigot's music warerooms, Mr. Dennis J. Magini, professor of dancing, etc., gaily apparelled, gravely walked, outpassed by a viceroy and unobserved. By the provost's wall came jauntily Blazes Boylan, stepping in tan shoes and socks with sky-blue clocks to the refrain of My Girl's a Yorkshire Girl. Blazes Boylan presented to the leaders sky-blue frontlets and high-action a sky-blue tie, a wide-brimmed straw hat at a rakish angle, and a suit of indigo serge. His hands in his jacket pockets forgot to salute, but he offered to the three ladies the bold admiration of his eyes and the red flower between his lips. As they drove along Nassau Street, His Excellency drew the attention of his bowing consort to the program of music which was being discoursed in College Park. Unseen, brazen Highland laddies blared and drum-thumped after the cortege. But though she's a factory lass and wears no fancy clothes, bada-bum, yet I've a sort of a Yorkshire relish for my little Yorkshire rose, bada-bum.
Tiller of the Wall, the quarter-mile flat handicappers, M.C. Green, H. Shrift, T.M. Patey, C. Scaife, J.B. Jeffs, G.N. Morphy, F. Stevenson, C. Adderley, and W. C. Huggard started in pursuit. Striding past Finn's Hotel, Cashel, Boyle, Connor, Fitzmaurice, Tisdall, Farrell stared through a fierce eyeglass across the carriages at the head of Mr. M. E. Solomons in the window of the Austro-Hungarian Vice-Consulate. Deep in Leinster Street, by Trinity's postern, a loyal Kingsman, hornblower, touched his taliho cap. As the glossy horses pranced by Marion Square, Master Patrick Aloysius Dignam, waiting, saw salutes being given to the gent with the topper, and raised also his new black cap with fingers greased by pork steak paper. His collar too sprang up. The Viceroy, on his way to inaugurate the Myers Bazaar in aid of funds for Mercer's Hospital, drove with the following towards Lower Mount Street. He passed a blind stripling opposite Broadbent's. In Lower Mount Street, a pedestrian in a brown mackintosh, eating dry bread, passed swiftly and unscattered across the Viceroy's path. At the Royal Canal Bridge, from his hoarding, Mr. Eugene Stratton, his blood lips agrin, bade all comers welcome to Pembroke Township. At Haddington Road corner, two sanded women halted themselves, an umbrella and a bag in which 11 cockles rolled to view with wonder the Lord Mayor and the Lady Mayoress without his golden chain. On Northumberland and Lansdowne roads, His Excellency acknowledged punctually salutes from rare male walkers, the salute of two small schoolboys at the garden gate of the house said to have been admired by the late Queen when visiting the Irish capital with her husband, the Prince Consort, in 1849, and the salute of Almidano Artifoni's sturdy trousers swallowed by a closing door.
Nausicaa. The summer evening had begun to fold the world in its mysterious embrace. Far away in the west, the sun was setting, and the last glow of all too fleeting day lingered lovingly on sea and strand, on the proud promontory of dear old Hout, guarding as ever the waters of the bay, on the weed-grown rocks along sandy Mount shore, and last but not least, on the quiet church whence there streamed forth at times upon the stillness the voice of prayer to her, who is in her pure radiance a beacon ever to the storm-tossed heart of man, Mary, star of the sea. The three girlfriends were seated on the rocks, enjoying the evening scene and the air, which was fresh but not too chilly. Many a time and oft were they wont to come there to that favorite nook to have a cozy chat beside the sparkling waves and discuss matters feminine. Sissy Caffrey and Edie Boardman with the baby in the pushcar, and Tommy and Jackie Caffrey, two little curly-headed boys dressed in sailor suits with caps to match, and the name H.M.S. Belazile printed on both. For Tommy and Jackie Caffrey were twins, scarce 4-year-olds, and very noisy and spoiled twins sometimes, but for all that darling little fellows with bright merry faces and endearing ways about them. They were dabbling in the sand with their spades and buckets, building castles as children do, or playing with their big colored ball, happy as the day was long. And Indy Boardman was rocking the chubby baby to and fro in the pushcar, while that young gentleman fairly chuckled with delight. He was but 11 months and 9 days old, and though still a tiny toddler, was just beginning to lisp his first babyish words. Sister Caffrey ran over to him to tease his fat little plucks and the dainty dimple in his chin. "Now, baby," Sister Caffrey said, "say out big, I want a drink of water." And the baby prattled after her, "A jinka jabu." Sissy Caffrey cuddled the wee chap, for she was awfully fond of children, so patient with little sufferers, and Tommy Caffrey could never be got to take his castor oil unless it was Sissy Caffrey that held his nose and promised him the scatty heel of the loaf or brown bread or with golden syrup on. What a persuasive power that girl had. But to be sure, baby was as good as gold, a perfect little dote in his fancy bib. None of your spoiled beauties, Flora McFlimsy's sort, was Sissy Caffrey. A true-hearted lass, never drew the breath of life, always with a laugh in her gypsy-like eyes, a frolicsome word on her cherry-ripe red lips, a girl lovable in the extreme. and Edie Boardman laughed too at the quaint language of little brother. But just then there was a slight altercation between Master Tommy and Master Jackie. Boys will be boys, and our two twins were no exception to this golden rule. The apple of discord was a certain castle of sand, which Master Jackie had built, and Master Tommy would have it right go wrong, that it was to be architecturally improved by a front door like the Martello Tower had. But if Master Tommy was headstrong, Master Jackie was self-willed too, and true to the maxim that every little Irishman's house is his castle, he fell upon his hated rival, and to such purpose that he would be a silent King Grief, and, alas to relate, the coveted castle too. Needless to say, the cries of discomfited Master Tommy drew the attention of the girl friends. "Come here, Tommy," his sister called imperatively, "at once! And you, Jackie? For shame to throw poor Tommy in the dirty sand. Wait till I catch you for that." His eyes misty with unshed tear, Master Tommy came at her, for their big sister's word was law with the twins. And in a sad plight he was too after his misadventure. His little manor war top and unmentionables were full of sand, but Sissy was a past mistress in the art of smoothing over life's tiny troubles, and then very quickly, not one speck of sand was to be seen on his smart little suit. Still the blue eyes were glistening with hot tears that would well up, so she kissed away the hurtness and shook her hand and Master Jackie, the culprit, and said if she was near him, she wouldn't be far from him, her eyes dancing in admonition. "Nasty bold Jackie," she cried. She put an arm around the little mariner and coaxed winningly. "What's your name, Butter and Cream?" "Tell us who is your sweetheart," spoke Edie Boardman. "Is Sissy your sweetheart?" "No," tearful Tommy said. "Is Edie Boardman your sweetheart?" Sissy queried. "No," Tommy said. "I know," Edie Boardman said, none too amiably, with an arch glance from her short-sighted eyes. "I know who is Tommy's sweetheart. Gertie is Tommy's sweetheart." "No," Tommy said on the verge of tears. Sissy's quick mother would guessed what was amiss, and she was whispered to Edie Boardman to take him there behind the pushcar where the gentleman couldn't see, and to mind he didn't wet his new tan shoes. But who was Gertie? Gertie McDowell was seated near the companions, lost in thought, gazing far away into the distance, was in very truth as fair a specimen of winsome Irish girlhood as one could wish to see. She was pronounced beautiful by all who knew her, though, as folks often said, she was more a guilt-trap than a McDowell. Her figure was slight and graceful, inclining even to fragility, but those iron jelloids she had been taking of late had done her a world of good, much better than the Window Welch's female pills, and she was much better of those discharges she used to get that tired feeling. The waxen pallor of her face was almost spiritual in its ivory-like purity, though her rosebud mouth was a genuine Cupid's bow, Greekly perfect. Her hands were of finely veined alabaster with tampering fingers, and as white as lemon juice and queen of ointments could make them, though it was not true that she used to wear kid gloves in bed or take a milk foot bath either. Berta Supple told that once to Edie Boardman, a deliberate lie, when she was black out of daggers drawn with Gertie. The girl chums had, of course, their little tiffs from time to time like the rest of mortals. And she told her not to let on whatever she did, that it was her that told her or she'd never speak to her again. No, honor where honor is due. There wasn't innate refinement. A languid queenly hauteur about Gertie was unmistakably evidenced in her delicate hands and high chin step. Had kind fate but willed her to be born a gentlewoman of high degree in her own right, and had she only received the benefit of a good education, Gertie McDowell might easily have held her own beside any lady in the land, and have seen herself exquisitely gowned with jewels on her brow, and patrician suitors at her feet vying with one another to pay her devours to her. Mayhap it was this. The love that might have been the land to her solely featured face, at whiles a look tense with suppressed meaning that imparted a strange yearning tendency to the beautiful eyes, a charm few could resist. Why have women such eyes of witchery? Gertie's were of the bluest Irish blue, set off by lustrous lashes and dark, expressive brows. Time was when those brows were no silky seductive. It was Madame Vera Verdi, directress of the Woman Beautiful page of the Press's novelette, who had first advised her to try eyebrow line, which gave her that haunting expression to her eyes, so becoming in leaders of fashions, and she had never regretted it. Then there was blushing scientifically cured, and how to be tall, increase your height, and you have a beautiful face but your nose. That would suit Mrs. Dignam because she had a button one. But Gertie's crowning glory was her wealth of wonderful hair. It was dark brown with a natural wave in it. She had cut it that very morning on account of the new moon, and it nestled about her pretty head in a profusion of luxuriant clusters, and pair her nails too. Thursday for wealth. And just now at Edie's words, as a telltale flush, delicate as the faintest rose bloom, crept into her cheeks, she looked so lovely in her sweet girlish shyness that of a sturdy God's fair land of Ireland did not hold her equal. For an instant she was silent with rather sad, downcast eyes. She was about to retort, but something checked the words on her tongue. Inclination prompted her to speak out. Dignity told her to be silent. The pretty lips pouted a while, but then she glanced up and broke into a joyous little laugh, which had in it but all the freshness of a young May morning. She knew right well, no one better, what makes Squinty Edie say that because of him cooling in his attentions when it was simply a lover's quarrel. As per usual, somebody's nose was out of joint about the boy that had the bicycle always riding up and down in front of her window. Only now his father kept him in the evening studying hard to get an exhibition in the intermediate that was on, and he was going to go to Trinity College to study for a doctor when he left the high school, like his brother Wiley, who was racing in the bicycle races in Trinity College University. Little record he perhaps for what she felt. The dull, aching void in her heart sometimes piercing to the core. Yet he was young, and perchance he might learn to love her in time. They were Protestant in his family, and of course Gertie knew who came first, and after him the Blessed Virgin, and then Saint Joseph. But he was undeniably handsome, with an exquisite nose, and he was what he looked, every inch a gentleman, the shape of his head too, and the back without his cap on that she would know anywhere something of the common, and the way he turned the bicycle at the lamp, with his hands off the bars, and also the nice perfume of those cigarettes, and besides, they were both of a size, and that was why Edie Boardman thought she was so frightfully clever, because he didn't go and ride up and down in front of her bit of a garden.
Gertie was dressed simply, but with the instinctive taste of a votary of Dame Fashion, for she felt that there was just a mind that he might be out. A neat blouse of electric blue, self-tinted by dolly dyes, because it was expected in the latest pictorial that electric blue would be worn, with a smart V opening down to the division and kerchief pocket, in which she always kept a piece of cotton wool scented with her favorite perfume because the handkerchief spoiled the sit, and the navy three-quarter skirt, cut to the stride, showed off her slim, graceful figure to perfection. She wore a coquettish little love of a hat of wide-leaved nigger straw contrast, trimmed with an underbrim of egg blue chenille, and at the side a butterfly bow to tone. All Tuesday week afternoon she was hunting to match that chenille, but at last she found what she wanted at Cleary's summer sales, the very it, slightly sharp soil, but you would never notice, 7 fingers, 2 and a penny. She did it all up by herself, and what joy was hers when she tried it on then, smiling at the lovely reflection which the mirror gave back to her. And when she put it on the water jug to keep the shape, she knew that that would take the shine out of some people she knew. Her shoes were the newest thing in footwear. Edie Boardman prided herself that she was very petite, but she never had a foot like Gertie McDowell, a 5 and never would ash oak or elm, with patent toe caps and just one smart buckle at her high-arched instep. Her well-turned ankle displayed its perfect proportions beneath her skirt, and just the proper C-17 again, can find it in his heart to blame her. She had 4 dinky sets with awfully pretty stitchery, 3 garments and nighties extra, and each set slotted with different colored ribbons, rose pink, pale blue, mauve, and pea green. And she aired them herself and blew them when they came home from the wash, and ironed them, and she had a brickbat to keep the iron on because she wouldn't trust those washerwomen as far as she'd see them scorching the things. She was wearing the blue for luck, hoping against hope, her own color and lucky too for a bride to have a bit of blue somewhere on her, because the green she wore that day week brought grief, because his father brought him in the study for the intermediate exhibition, and because she thought perhaps he might be out because she was dressing that morning, she nearly slipped up the old pair on her inside out, and that was for luck and lovers' meeting if you put those things on inside out, so long as it wasn't of a Friday. And yet, that strained look on her face, a gnawing sorrow is there all the time. Her very soul is in her eyes, and she would give worlds to be in the privacy of her own familiar chamber where, giving way to tears, she could have a good cry and relieve her pent-up feelings. Though not too much, because she knew how to cry nicely before the mirror. "You are lovely, Gertie," it said. The pale light of evening falls upon a face infinitely sad and wistful. Gertie McDowell yearns in vain. Yes, she had known from the very first that her daydream of a marriage had been arranged, and the wedding bells ringing for Mrs. Reggie Wiley, TCD, because the one who married the elder brother would be Mrs. Wiley. And in the fashionable intelligence, Mrs. Gertrude Wiley was wearing a sumptuous confection of grey trimmed with expensive blue fox was not to be. He was too young to understand. He would not believe in love, a woman's birthright. The night of the party long ago in Stowers, he was still in short trousers when they were alone, and he stole an arm round her waist. She went white to the very lips. He called her little one in a strangely husky voice and snatched a half-kiss, the first, but it was only the end of her nose, and then he hastened from the room with a remark about refreshments. Impetuous fellow. Strength of character had never been Reggie Wiley's strong point, and he who would woo and win Gertie McDowell must be a man among men. But waiting, always waiting to be asked, and it was leap year too, and would soon be over. No Prince Charming is her beau ideal to lay a rare and wondrous love at her feet, but rather a manly man with a strong, quiet face who had not found his ideal. Perhaps his hair slightly flecked with grey, and who would understand, take her in his sheltering arms, strain her to him in all the strength of his deep, passionate nature, and comfort her with a long, long kiss. It would be like heaven. For such a one she yearns this balmy summer eve. With all the heart of her she longs to be his only, his affianced bride, for riches, for poor, in sickness, in health, till death us two part, from this to this day forward. And while Edie Boardman was with little Tommy behind the pushcar, she was just thinking, would the day ever come when she could call herself his little wife-to-be? Then they could talk about her till they went blue in the face. Bertha supple too, and Edie the spitfire because she would be 22 in November. She would care for him with creature comforts too, for Gertie was womanly wise and knew that a mere man liked that feeling of hominess. Her griddle cakes done to a golden brown hue and Queen Anne's pudding of delightful creaminess had won golden opinions from all, because she had a lucky hand also for lighting a fire, dredged in the fine self-raising flour and always stir in the same direction, then cream the milk and sugar and whisk well the white of eggs, though she didn't like the eating part when there were any people that made her shy. And often she wondered why you couldn't eat something poetical, like violets or roses, and they would have a beautifully appointed drawing room with pictures and engravings and a photograph of Grandpapa Giltrap's lovely dog, Gary Owen, that almost talked, it was so human, and chintz covers for the chairs and that silver toast track in clear as summer jumble stays like they have in rich houses. He would be tall, with broad shoulders. She had always admired tall men for her husband, with glistening white teeth under his carefully trimmed, sweeping moustache, and they would go on the continent for their honeymoon, 3 wonderful weeks. And then, when they settled down in a nice, snug and cozy little homely house, every morning they would have brekkie, simple but perfectly served, for their own two selves, and before he went out to business, he would give his dear little wifey a good hearty hug and gaze for a moment deep down into her eyes. Edie Boardman asked Tommy Caffrey was he done, and he said yes, so then she buttoned up his little knickerbockers for him and told him to run off and play with Jackie and be good now and not to fight. But Tommy said he wanted the ball, and Edie told him no, that baby was playing with the ball, and if he took it there'd be wings on the green. But Tommy said it was his ball, and he wanted his ball, and he pranced on the ground if you please. The temper of him. Oh, he was a man already, was little Tommy Caffrey, since he was out of pennies. Edie told him no, and to be off now with him, and she told Sissy Caffrey not to give in to him. You're not my sister, naughty Tommy said. It's my ball. But Sissy Caffrey told Baby Boardman to look up Look up high at her finger, and she snatched the ball quickly and threw it along the sand, and Tommy after it in full career, having won the day. Anything for a quiet life, laughed Sis. And she tickled Tiny Todd's 2 cheeks to make him forget, and played, here's the Lord Mayor, here's his 2 horses, here's his gingerbread carriage, and here he walks in, chin chopper, chin chopper, chin chopper, chin. But Edie got as cross as 2 sticks about him getting his own way like that, from everyone always petting him. I'd like to give him something, she said, so I would, where I won't say. On the B2T2, laughed Sissy merrily. Gertie McDowell bent down her head and crimsoned at the idea of Sissy saying an unladylike thing like that out loud. She'd be ashamed of her life to say, flushing a deep rosy red. And Edie Boardman said she was sure the gentleman opposite heard what she said. But not a pin cared, Sis? Let him, she said with a pert toss of her head and a piquant tilt of her nose. Give it to him too, on the same place, as quick as I'd look at him. Madcap Sis with her gollywog curls. You had to laugh at her sometimes. For instance, when she asked you, would you have some more Chinese tea and raspberry ram? And when she drew the jugs too and the men's faces on her nails with red ink, make you split your sides, or when she wanted to go where you know she said she wanted to run and pay a visit to the Miss White. That was just like Sissy comes. Oh, and will you ever forget the evening she dressed up in her father's suit and hat and the burnt cork mustache and walked down Tritonville Road smoking a cigarette? There was none to come up to her for fun. But she was sincerity itself, one of the bravest and truest hearts heaven ever made. Not one of your two-faced things, too sweet to be wholesome. And then there came out upon the air the sound of voices and the pealing anthem of the organ. It was the men's temperance retreat conducted by the missioner, the Reverend John Hughes, S.J., Rosary, Sermon, and Benediction of the Most Blessed Sacrament. They were there, gathered together without distinction of social class, and a most edifying spectacle it was to see, in that simple fane beside the waves, after the storms of this weary world, kneeling before the feet of the Immaculate, reciting the litany of Our Lady of Loreto, beseeching her to intercede for them, the old familiar words, Holy Mary, Holy Virgin of Virgins. How sad to poor Gertie's ears. Had her father only avoided the clutches of the demon drink, by taking the pleasure of those powders the drink habit cured in persons weakly, she might now be rolling in her carriage, second to none. Over and over she had told herself that as she mused by the dying embers in a brown study without the lamp, because she hated 2 lights, or oftentimes gazing out of the window dreamily by the hour at the rain falling on the rusty bucket, thinking. But that vile decoction which has ruined so many hearts and homes had cast its shadow over her childhood days. Nay, she had even witnessed in the home circled deeds of violence caused by intemperance, and had seen her own father, a prey to the fumes of intoxication, forget himself completely, for if there was one thing of all things that Gertie knew, it was that the man who lifts his hand to a woman, save in the way of kindness, deserves to be branded as the lowest of the low. And still the voices sang in supplication to the Virgin most powerful, Virgin most merciful. And Gertie, wrapped in thought, scarce saw or heard her companions or the twins at their boyish gambols, or the gentleman off Sandymount Green that Sissy Caffrey called the man that was so like himself, passing along the strand, taking a short walk. You never saw him anyway screwed, but still, and for all that, she would not like him for her father, because he was too old, or something, or on account of his face. It was a palpable case of Dr. Fell, or his carbuncle nose with the pimples on it, and his sandy mustache a bit white under the nose. Poor father. With all his faults, she loved him still when she sang, Tell me, Mary, how to woo thee, or my love and cottage near Rochelle. And they had stewed cockles and lettuce with Lazenby's salad dressing for supper. And when he sang, The moon hath rised, with Mr. Dignam that died suddenly and was buried, God have mercy on him from a stroke. Her mother's birthday that was, and Charlie was home on his holidays, and Tom and Mr. Dignam and Mrs. and Patsy and Freddie Dignam, and they were to have had a group taken. No one would have thought the end was so near. Now he was laid to rest. And her mother said to him to let that be a warning to him for the rest of his days. And he couldn't even go to the funeral on account of the gout. And she had to go into town to bring him the letters and samples from his office about Catesby's cork lino, artistic standard designs fit for a palace, gives tip-top wear and always bright and cheery in the home. A sterling good daughter was Gertie, just like a second mother in the house, a ministering angel too, with a little heart worth its weight in gold. And when her mother had those raging, splitting headaches, who was it rubbed the menthol cone on her forehead but Gertie, though she didn't like her mother's taking pinches of snuff, and that was the only thing they ever had words about, taking snuff. Everyone thought the world of her for her gentle ways. It was Gertie who turned off the gas at the main every night, and it was Gertie who tacked up on the wall of that place where she never forgot every fortnight the chloride of lime, Mr. Tunney the grocer's Christmas almanac, the picture of halcyon days where a young gentleman in the costume they used to wear then, with a three-cornered hat, was offering a bunch of flowers to his lady love, with old-time chivalry through her lattice window. You could see there was a story behind it. The colors would done something lovely. She was in a soft, clinging white and a studied attitude, and the gentleman was in chocolate, and he looked a thorough aristocrat. She often looked at them dreamily when she went there for a certain purpose, and felt her own arms that were white and soft just like hers with the sleeves back, and thought about those times because she had found out in Walker's pronouncing dictionary that belonged to Grandpapa Giltrap about the halcyon days what they meant. Thank you for listening.